This business starts and ends with the quality of the wine. That was always my father's overriding concern, and really informed everything that we have done. We've grown over the years, but more importantly, I think that we have committed and recommitted to being at the top of the quality pyramid, which is a different kind of growth, if you will. It doesn't necessarily result in volume growth, and it doesn't necessarily result in, well, it doesn't always result in profitability growth, but I think it, over the long haul, creates a great deal of long-term value for the enterprise. And that's what we have focused on, and that's always been my primary concern. And my father's primary concern was making sure the quality was in the bottle, and all else flowed from that. So winemaking decisions were made always completely independently of the business realities that might have been out there at the time. Just this fall, we were releasing the 40th vintage of Insignia, and I think, with all humility, I think Insignia has really taken its place very close to the top of the pyramid of the wine world. We take a great deal of pride in the long-term track record of Insignia over the past 40 years. And I love to give full credit for that success to my father and his original conception of a unique cuvée to be made in each vintage. It evolved very quickly into being a Cabernet-based blend, and now it will always be a Cabernet-based blend, but his original conception was much broader, in fact, and it could have been other wines. He just wanted to make the single best cuvée in any specific vintage that he could. We made a decision beginning in the early 2000s that we were going to be 100% estate with Insignia. Now we're 100% estate with all of our wines, but with Insignia we made that decision to do that first, and Insignia was 100% estate beginning with the 2004 vintage. Now that, of course, limits us in terms of quantity. So while we do make quite a bit of Insignia, it is limited by the gifts of the vintage in each specific year. One of the greatest decisions my father made was that he augmented his vineyard holdings whenever he possibly could, adding to what was here on this ranch with purchases in Stag's Leap, in Rutherford, in the Oak Knoll area, and in South Napa, and in Oakville, that have been just absolutely stellar sources of grapes for Insignia over the years. I often compare our vineyard sources to an artist's palette, where the winemaking team is given a great number of resources from which to draw in any specific year to create Insignia, and from different parts of the valley and different blends. The blend of Insignia does change every year. Some years it will contain all 5 of the classic Bordeaux varietals. Some years as few as 2. Probably my biggest regret is that I have passed on opportunities to buy land in Napa County and in Sonoma County in the last 7 or 8 years, that I really should have pulled the trigger and made those purchases. I'm very conservative by nature, and I thought that the prices would not make sense, would not pencil out. However, all I have to do is think back to the early 1980s when my father bought a great deal of additional property in Stag's Leap and Rutherford, areas like that, for numbers that people said he was nuts at the time to pay those prices, and yet they are laughably small today. He was a risk taker. My father was more of a risk taker than I am. My dad didn't think of himself as just a farmer. He thought of himself as a businessman. I don't believe that it's just an aw shucks couple of farms proposition here. I believe it's a very complex and sophisticated business, especially when you do it the way that we do it, which is completely vertically integrated. One of the few times when my father did not take a risk and regretted it later was the famous Isley Vineyard outside of Calistoga. We made the wines from the Isley Vineyard for 17 vintages, 1975 through 1991. And my dad had the opportunity to purchase that vineyard and passed on it. And he had good and valid reasons for passing on it at the time. But in retrospect, it's a priceless asset, and he should have bought it. Like many of our peers in the business, we could see that the future in terms of profitability lay in direct-to-consumer business. The best way to build direct-to-consumer business is through personal visits to the winery. We have a very successful wine club that we've built up over the last 15, 18 years, more like 20 years now. Approximately 95% of our club signups are the direct result of a personal visit to the winery. That's what gets people interested in our wines and makes them want to join the club and be a part of it. Today we're at what we call the home ranch, which is the cattle ranch that my father bought 42 and a half years ago. And to see the nurturing and the stewardship of this ranch and the way it's been maintained, the way it's been honored over the decades is something that I take a great deal of pride in. This place looks great. And for us, it's a pretty good example of the best that Napa Valley has to offer the world. It's a place that people love to come and visit. It's a place they feel at home. It is my home. I'm honored to live here. I take a great deal of pride in that. I'm very excited with what we've been able to do in a much shorter time period over in Freestone in Sonoma County with our Pinot Noir and Chardonnay initiatives over there. I think that they're following along in the footsteps of their older sibling, the Napa vineyards of Joseph Phelps, and will continue to have the same long-term promise and long-term success that we've enjoyed here in Napa as well. We're talking about our decision to renovate this building. It was rooted in a number of factors. We felt that we had among the best wines in the business. We felt that we certainly had the best people in the business. And we wanted to provide a visitor experience that was commensurate with the quality of the wines and the quality of the people that we had. It was time to do it. The building was 42 years old. It's a beautiful, iconic redwood structure that really has stood the test of time and looks beautiful, will last a very long time. But it was dated. The building was built in the era before computers, and the heating and the air conditioning and all of the infrastructure of the building was aged. So it was time. I felt and convinced our family and our board, if we're only going to do this every 40 years, you better do it really well. I was completely confident from the time we made the decision that this is an investment that would pay off. I had no doubt of that. It's a long-term investment, but we think in very long terms around here. My father was very much a long-term thinker, and I've tried to follow in those footsteps. I think if you think back to 20 years ago when people didn't pay for tastings and it was almost an atmosphere of walking up to a tasting bar, it is very, very different now and much more intimate. We have invested a great deal in wine educators, in training them, in retaining them. Our wine educators are the day-to-day interface between the wines and our customers. And we know how incredibly important those people are to our success, and we've invested a great deal in their training and in their well-being and in their longevity to us as employees. They're really important to us. You know, I try to look around at who's here on almost any given day, and without a doubt, our customers are coming here for educational experiences in addition to having fun. They're here to learn about wine. They want to know about the place. They want to know about our people, and they want to know a lot about our history. We find that they are intensely interested in the history of the place and the background of our family and the background of our key employees. They're really interested in that. They're passionate themselves about us and about our wine. And to see them enjoying themselves so much and getting so excited about the wines and about the story that is behind the wines is immensely gratifying to me. We do make use of scores in our marketing materials. Sometimes I get a little nervous about it because if you live by that sword, you might die by that sword as well. But the critics in general have been very, very good to us over the years, and we do actively use scores in the marketing of our wines. The only thing that matters to a wine consumer should be what he or she thinks of the wine themselves. Scores are great. They can be a good guideline. They can help inform your buying decisions. But I would hope that most consumers out there, it's just one of the factors that they consider. I honestly think that scores probably mean less now than they did 15, 20 years ago. And I think that the growth of the internet has had a great deal to do with that. There is so much information available to consumers about wines now that scores are only one of the factors that enter into their thinking. And that's the way it should be. They should be thinking about the place of origin of the wine. They should be thinking about flavor profiles and alcohol levels and tannin properties that appeal to them. And scores are just one component of all of that they are taking in. Another major change over the past 20 or 30 years is what I would call the globalization of the wine business. I remember going to Van Expo for the first time, 10 years or so ago, and I live in this world of California wine, and I went to this immense exposition hall, and California wine took up about 1% of the space, and it just brought home to me more than anything else the immense impact that wine has worldwide, and that it is a worldwide business, and that wine is produced and consumed in almost every country of the world. The quality and the variety of wines that are available to American consumers is staggering today. How much there is, how good it is, and how well priced it is. So that certainly creates a lot of competitive challenges for us because, yes, the wine world gets far more competitive, and the bar keeps getting raised higher in terms of quality and in terms of packaging, and all aspects of the business get more sophisticated, more challenging every year. Another of the major challenges that I've dealt with in recent years, in fact I'm dealing with them right now, is the aftermath of my father's passing last year. I actually am not speaking of that in an emotional sense. Of course, that's a major emotional time for all of us, but from a business, tax, planning standpoint, these are very difficult problems to work through. We're in the thick of it right now. We'll get through them. We'll be fine. But it's been a very challenging time for me personally and for our family, just from a business standpoint. People often ask me about my path to come into the family business, and I often say that my father and I did a long dance around one another. I would say that dance lasted more than a decade. I remember actually in 1995, I got a call from him out of the blue, completely unexpected, and he said, "I think it's time you and I did something together in the business world. Work up your thoughts and we'll talk about it." Well, that was in 1995, and I didn't actually make the move until 1998. So the dance continued for 3 more years while we worked that through. We wanted to have me get involved in things, but not just come in and assume a huge role. So I took on a bunch of other projects. I got very involved from the outset in our new project out in Freestone. It's now 18 years, so it's not fair to call it new any longer, I suppose. But that was one of the projects that I got intimately involved in from the very beginning. My legal background helped. We did a lot of real estate work out there, a lot of land use regulation work, a lot of regulatory work, a lot of county permitting work, and my legal background certainly helped with those aspects of the project. But as I said, it was a long dance that we did around one another. I would look back on my career and define it as successful if I'm successful in carrying out the generational transition that we need to see, that we want to see for our family.
It's challenging to transfer any business, let alone the wine business, down the generations, we've been really proactive and gotten a lot of people involved in the process, knowing that we're up against some challenges, whether it's hiring a family business advisor, hiring some outside members to our board of directors, getting family employment policies in place. We've done all these things in an effort to make this transition as smooth as possible.
I sometimes say that my great passion in life is not wine per se. I love wine. I love to drink wine, and I love knowing more about wine and learning more all the time about wine. But my great passion is seeing this business succeed across generational lines. That's been the primary focus of my last 15 years or so. The greatest challenge that I face is completing the handoff from generation 1 to generation 2, and then subsequently to generation 3. This is a very difficult long-term project. I suppose I can say that the transition from the first generation to the second generation has been completed, but in large part that had to do with the passing of my father, which of course was a sad event. But we began working on transitioning the family ownership and the family management of the company many years ago. And we recognized, as do most leaders in family business contexts, that a transition is not easy from generation 1 to generation 2, but becomes exponentially more difficult and more challenging the deeper into the generations you go. Of course, there's obvious reasons for that. There are more people involved. There are competing dynamics and lots of issues that are difficult to anticipate and not so easy necessarily to handle. What we have done is we've retained outside consultants and advisors. We've worked with a woman for the last 4 or 5 years who is an advisor to family businesses, multi-generational family businesses. She happens to come from a farming business background of her own that is multi-generational. We have retained 2 independent outside directors to join our board, both of whom have substantial experience working with family businesses in multi-generational settings. We continue to work with estate planning experts and accounting experts to put structures in place that will help facilitate these changes. I was the only member of the second generation that took an active day-to-day role. And I didn't come into the family business myself until I was in my mid-40s. I practiced law for quite a long time before getting involved in the family business, and perhaps I came in a little late in the game, but that's the way it worked out, and it worked out well at the end. Now that we have multiple third-generation members, we're going to face those issues. However, they really haven't arisen yet because these are still very young people. They're now all in their early 30s and just still getting established as independent business people. We've put policies in place to encourage family members to come into the business in the right way at the right time and with the right guidance. We now have 3 third-generation family members actively working here. My son Will, Elizabeth, who is my niece, and now my own daughter Allie is working in a different capacity here at the winery as well. I like to recall a story about my dad. When he decided to enter into the wine business, he was looking at the Napa Valley and he said, you know, there's already 20 or 30 wineries here, and there can't possibly be room for that many more. Well, that was one of his rare missteps and one of his rare misperceptions about the potential of the wine business. About 10 years ago, our CFO and I sat down with my dad to go over a number of pretty significant business issues that he needed to deal with, and he was getting frustrated, and he said, well, heck, I don't know why this is all so complicated. It's just a couple of farms. And we've continued to use that line starting with putting rootstock in the ground all the way through growing the grapes, making the wine, bottling the wine, selling the wine. We do every bit of it, from planting the rootstock to pulling the cork. That is a very complex business with a lot of moving parts. So no, I don't think of us as just farmers. We're going to make it happen so that there can be a successful third, fourth, even fifth generation at Joseph Phelps.